Hollywood sold a version of the Old West that never existed. Good guy gunslingers, high noon duels, Native Americans as villains. Most Westerns repeat that. But about 20 movies went further and got things right that history books confirm. Here, I gave each one a rating and separated what's real from what was made up, because understanding the fiction is the best way to get to the real West. Movie 1. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. Rating, 10. Most people don't know this. This movie wasn't made by Americans. Sergio Leone was Italian. He shot it in the Spanish desert. The Civil War uniforms look strange because they were made by European workshops using photos as references. Clint Eastwood barely talks. Leone wanted him quiet because the Italian crew couldn't write good dialogue in English. And still, it became the Western. The movie every other one is measured against. Ennio Morricone created that score using gunshots, whip cracks, and a guy howling like a coyote. Everything revolves around greed. 3 guys chasing buried gold who would kill each other if the math worked out. Leone understood something John Ford never said out loud. The Old West was already a myth before Hollywood ever touched it. So he went all in. The geography is wrong. The history is a mess. None of the main characters look like someone who ever rode a horse for a living. It doesn't matter. It works because Leone didn't want to show the real West. He was building something better than reality. And more than 50 years later, no one has topped it. Movie 2, Unforgiven, 1992. Rating, 10. In 1992, the Western was pretty much dead in Hollywood. Then Clint Eastwood did something no one expected. Instead of bringing the genre back with more shootouts and heroes, he buried the myth for good. William Money is a guy who killed women and everything else that got in his way. He left that life behind, got married, raised pigs. When his wife dies and the money runs out, he goes back to killing for a reward. There's no glory in it. There's no epic score when someone gets shot. There's an old man, his hands shaking, doing what he swore he'd never do again. Gene Hackman stole every scene as Sheriff Little Bill, a guy who keeps order in town by breaking the fingers and ribs of anyone who disagrees with him. He won the Oscar for it, deservedly. What makes this movie different from any other Western is simple. It shows that killing a person isn't like it is in the movies. It's dirty, it takes time, and the person who does it never forgets. If you grew up watching John Wayne, Eastwood owed you this correction. Movie 3, Tombstone, 1993. Rating, 9. You've probably seen about 15 movies about the shootout at the OK Corral. You can forget all of them. Tombstone gets right what the others got wrong because it treats the town as what it was. A place where mining money bought political power, and guns settled what the law couldn't. Val Kilmer steals every scene as Doc Holliday. That's not an exaggeration. Ask anyone who's seen this movie, and the first thing they'll mention is him. Kurt Russell plays a tougher Wyatt Earp than the real one, but it works on screen. The shootout itself? In real life, it lasted about 30 seconds, and the movie respects that. Now, Hollywood is Hollywood. The 18 months of real conflict become just a few weeks on screen. They made up a romantic scene between Wyatt and Josie at the hotel that never happened. And Doc's death by his friend's side? Pure fiction. Holliday died alone in a sanatorium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, 6 years after the shootout, at 36. They say his last words were, "This is funny," looking at his own bare feet. He always thought he'd die with his boots on. Movie 4, Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. Rating, 9.5. You know Henry Fonda, America's good guy, the face you trusted in every courtroom and war movie. When Leone cast him as a cold-blooded killer, Audiences in 1968 were shocked. That was the point. Leone wanted you to feel betrayed. The second Fonda's blue eyes showed up on screen. The first 15 minutes have almost no dialogue. 3 gunslingers wait at a train station, flies buzz, a windmill creaks, nothing happens, and you can't look away. Leone understood what few directors do. Tension lives in silence, not in explosions. But the bigger story is something else. The railroad is coming. The age of gunslingers is over. Every character is fighting for a world that's already disappeared under their boots. Bronson plays a man who's been carrying revenge since childhood. Cardinale is the only one smart enough to see the future and bet on it. Leone filmed this like he was painting the ceiling of a cathedral. Massive landscapes, close-ups of sweat and dust, Morricone's score doing half the acting. If you've never seen it, you owe yourself 2 hours and 45 minutes. Movie 5, True Grit, 2010, rating 9/9. The Coen brothers took the same Charles Portis book that led to the 1969 movie and did something different. Instead of building a vehicle for a star, they told the story right. Haley Steinfeld was 13 when she filmed it. She carries the entire movie on her back. Jeff Bridges plays a Rooster Cogburn that John Wayne never would. A real drunk, smelly, with completely crooked morals. And that's exactly what a U.S. Marshal in Indian Territory in the 1870s would have been like. The frontier legal system shows up in a way you rarely see in Hollywood. Quick trials, public hangings, the law working more like negotiation than justice. The character's language is formal in a strange way, and that's historically accurate. People in the 19th century talked like that. The movie's only sin is being too beautiful. The real Old West was uglier. But at least that beauty serves the story instead of lying about it. Movie 6, High Noon, 1952. Rating 9. In 1952, Hollywood released a Western that pissed off half the world. High Noon wasn't about shootouts or horses. It was about cowardice. Gary Cooper plays a sheriff who finds out an outlaw is coming back to town to kill him. He goes door to door asking for help. No one shows up. Every citizen has a reasonable excuse not to get involved. The screenwriter, Carl Foreman, was in the sights of the House Un-American Activities Committee when he wrote this. The movie was his story told as a Western. John Wayne was furious. He called the movie unpatriotic because the hero asked for help instead of handling everything on his own. Wayne and director Howard Hawks were so bothered by it that they made Rio Bravo as a direct response, a Western where the sheriff refuses help out of pride. High Noon won 4 Oscars. Cooper won Best Actor, and they say he was so nervous on Oscar night that he could barely speak. The movie runs 85 minutes and plays out basically in real time, which cranks up the tension in a way you feel in your stomach. It's not a historical portrait, it's a fable, but it's the smartest one the classic Western ever produced. Movie 7, The Searchers, 1956, rating 9. In 1956, Hollywood was still selling the Old West as a land of white heroes against savages. John Ford decided to flip that on its head. Ethan Edwards, played by John Wayne, is no hero. He's a Civil War veteran consumed by racial hatred, who goes after his niece after she's kidnapped by Comanches. The detail that hits hard: the movie never makes it clear whether he wants to save her or kill her, because in his mind, living among Native Americans has already contaminated her. Wayne had never done anything like this, neither had Ford. For that time, making the main character someone that disturbed was like dropping a bomb in the audience's lap. Scorsese said years later that this is the most important American film ever made. An exaggeration? Maybe. But think about it. What other Western from the 1950s had the guts to ask whether the guy in the white hat was actually the problem. The portrayal of the Comanches is still flawed, yes, but Ford opened a door no one before him wanted to open. This movie bothered people in 1956. And if you pay attention, it still bothers people today. Movie 8, Lonesome Dove, 1989, rating 9.5. In 1989, American television did something movies had tried to do for decades and never managed. Show the Old West as it really was. No glamour, no shootouts every 5 minutes. Lonesome Dove, based on Larry McMurtry's Pulitzer-winning novel, follows 2 former Texas Rangers on a cattle drive from Texas to Montana. Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones give performances that more than 30 years later still haven't been topped. But what makes this miniseries different from everything that came before? It doesn't romanticize anything. Ranch work is repetitive and brutal. People die from fever, accidents, plain bad luck. The characters deal with former slaves and Native Americans without that good guy and villain filter Hollywood loved to use. Historians of the American West often say, no other production has come so close to the reality of life on the frontier. If you only have time to watch one thing from this entire list, make it this one. 4 episodes. That will change the way you see that era. Movie 9, The Wild Bunch, 1969. Rating 9. In 1969, Hollywood was still selling the Old West as a land of white hat heroes. Sam Peckinpah disagreed. He made a movie where the gunslingers are old, tired, and lost in a world that doesn't need them anymore. The story takes place in 1913, when the Wild West had already become the past. Pike Bishop's gang crosses the border into Mexico, looking for one last score before time swallows them for good. The final scene has 12 minutes of slow-motion gunfire with more than 90 deaths. Back then, people walked out of theaters feeling sick. That was exactly what Peckinpah wanted. He threw the violence in the audience's face to say, there's nothing beautiful about this. What the movie really delivers is the dynamic between criminals who trust each other more than they trust the rest of the world. William Holden and Ernest Borgnine do the best work of their careers here. The Wild Bunch doesn't romanticize anything. It shows the Old West dying, and dying ugly. Movie 10, Shane, 1953, rating 8.5. Alan Ladd was 5'6". They put him next to Jack Palance, who was almost 6'4". That wasn't an accident. Director George Stevens wanted you to feel, visually, that Shane was at a disadvantage. And it worked. The smaller guy, staring down the most dangerous gunslinger in the valley, became one of the most copied scenes in American cinema. But the movie goes beyond the duel. In the 1870s and 1880s, farmers and cattle ranchers fought real wars over control of land in the West. The Johnson County War in Wyoming, 1892, is the best-known example. Rich ranchers hired gunslingers to get rid of small settlers who were fencing off open land. Shane takes that conflict and simplifies it, of course, but it gets the essential part right. It was a fight over money and land, not honor. The gunslinger who shows up solves the problem with violence and then leaves knowing he has no place in that new world. That structure showed up in dozens of movies afterward. Even Logan, from 2017, with Hugh Jackman, makes a direct reference. The kid yelling, "Shane, come back." At the end, still works because everyone has felt someone leave without being able to stop them. Movie 11, Open Range, 23, rating 8.5. In the 1880s, the American West was split by a war almost no one talks about. On one side were cowboys driving cattle across open land with no fences and no owner. On the other were farmers and local barons who fenced everything off with barbed wire and used the law to push out anyone who lived off open grazing. The fight was over water, land, and money. Kevin Costner captured that like few others. He directed and starred alongside Robert Duvall, who gives one of the best performances of his career. The final shootout throws out the Hollywood rulebook. No perfect shots or invincible heroes. People miss, panic, stumble. It's confusing in the way a real confrontation would be. The script is based on a conflict that actually happened in Colorado and Wyoming, where small ranchers were pushed out by people with political power and money. It wasn't good guys against bad guys. It was raw capitalism fighting over every acre of the West. Annette Bening shows up in a role the Oscars should have recognized, but ignored. If you think you've seen everything in Westerns, this one will catch you off guard. Movie 12, The Outlaw. Josie Wales, 1986, rating 8.5. In Ain't Ive, Missouri was no man's land. Federal militias burned farms, killed entire families, and forced former Confederate guerrillas to swear loyalty to the Union under threat of execution by firing squad. Anyone who refused became fair game. Eastwood took that story and turned it into the first major Western he directed. The main character loses his family, fights with Bloody Bill Anderson's guerrillas, and when the war ends, refuses to surrender. The government sends men to hunt him down, and he runs to Texas, which at the time was a destination for Confederate fugitives looking to start over far from Washington. The surprise of the movie is what happens along the way. Josie Wales starts gathering unlikely people, lost settlers, a Navajo grandmother, an old Cherokee played by Chief Dan George, who stole every scene he was in. This group forms a community in the middle of nowhere, and that's where the movie gains weight. It's about rebuilding something after everything has been destroyed. The movie sympathizes with the Confederate side more than history justifies, and that's uncomfortable. But it shows something few Westerns show, what the West was like for the people who lost the war. Movie 13, Dances with Wolves, 1990, rating 8. In 1990, Kevin Costner did something Hollywood thought was crazy. He directed and starred in a 3-hour Western where the Lakota Indians were the good guys. And a lot of the dialogue was in the Lakota language, with subtitles. Studio executives bet it would be a disaster. They called the project Kevin's Gate, a reference to the failure of Heaven's Gate. The movie won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture. But what really changed the game was something else. Before 1990, Hollywood treated Native Americans like background extras with no voice. After this movie, it became harder to do that without being questioned. It's true that some Native critics found the approach condescending. The story still depends on a white man as the central character to work. That was a limitation of the time, and the movie doesn't escape it. But the portrayal of life on the Great Plains in the 1860s, the relationships between tribes, and the brutality of the U.S. Army are handled with a level of care that didn't exist in movies up to that point. Costner bet his entire career on this movie, and he won. Movie 14, Deadwood, TV series, 2004-2006, rating 9.5. Have you ever stopped to think about how a town is born from nothing? Not the pretty way we see in books, the real way, with mud, blood, and people trying to survive. Deadwood shows exactly that. HBO took the real story of a mining camp in South Dakota in the 1870s and turned it into a series that doesn't romanticize anything. The town takes shape right before your eyes. No law, no government, no hospital, just people fighting over gold, power, and territory. Ian McShane plays Al Swearingen, a guy who really existed, a saloon owner, manipulative, violent, but somehow you can't stop watching him. David Milch, the creator, researched historical records to build the dialogue and characters. The brothels aren't there for shock value. They were the local economy, along with mining. Politics is born behind the scenes, in backroom bar deals, exactly the way it happened. If you want to understand how the American West really worked, before the legends, this series is the closest television has ever gotten. Movie 15, 310 to Yuma, Taiwan 7, rating 8.5. In 957, Hollywood filmed this story for the first time. 50 years later, they did it again. And here's what no one expected. The second version is better. Russell Crowe plays Ben Wade, an outlaw who doesn't pretend to be anything else. He robs, he kills, and he knows exactly the weight of every decision. He has no remorse, but he has no illusions either. On the other side, Christian Bale is Dan Evans, a broke farmer who agrees to escort Wade to the prison train because he needs the money. Simple as that. A desperate man doing a dangerous job for practical reasons. The movie shows 1880s Arizona as it really was. Lawless territory, where the railroad moved forward through brutality and the Rangers operated in a gray area between order and violence. The ending was rewritten from the original and sparked debate among fans. It's harsher, more ambiguous, and doesn't give you the comfort classic westerns usually offered. That's the point. If you grew up watching westerns where the good guy always won clean, this movie will make you rethink what winning meant in the real Old West. Movie 16, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, 1971, rating 8.5. Forget everything you think you know about westerns. In 1971, Robert Altman threw out the rule book and made something no one had seen before. Warren Beatty plays McCabe, a guy who shows up in a muddy little mining town in the Pacific Northwest thinking he's the man. He opens a brothel, and he's terrible at the business. Julie Christie shows up as Mrs. Miller, a British madam who actually understands how the whole thing works. She's the brains of the operation. He just hasn't realized it yet. But the main point Altman is making isn't about cowboys against outlaws. It's about what really destroyed the small entrepreneur in the Old West. Corporations. The town grows. Big money arrives, and McCabe gets crushed. No shootout fixes the situation. Just business. The whole movie looks like faded records from the time coming to life, shot with special lenses that make everything feel like 1900. And historically, it gets something right that most westerns ignore. Mining towns ran on brothels the same way they ran on general stores. That was the real economy. And setting the story in the Northwest instead of the Arizona desert, that alone was revolutionary. Movie 17, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969, rating 8. Newman and Redford did something rare here. They turned two bank robbers into guys you root for to get away, and American audiences bought into that idea completely. The movie became a phenomenon in 1969, right in the middle of the counterculture, when nobody wanted squeaky clean heroes anymore. Now, if you think you're watching the true story of the Wild Bunch, hold on. The real gang was much bigger and had nothing charming about it. They were rough people with a history of violence that Hollywood preferred to ignore. At a place, the woman who went with the two of them to South America is still a mystery to this day. No one knows for sure who she was, where she came from, or what happened to her afterward. The movie uses an endless chase as the engine of the plot, but reality was different. There were attempts to negotiate surrender, and Cassidy even worked legally in mines in Bolivia. The accurate version of this story still hasn't made it to the screen. But what George Roy Hill delivered works so well that most people don't even care. Movie 18, News of the World, 2020, rating 8. In 1870, Texas was still no man's land. The Civil War had ended 5 years earlier, but peace hadn't arrived. Tom Hanks plays a former Confederate captain who makes a living traveling from town to town, reading newspapers out loud to people who simply couldn't read. Along the way, he finds an orphan girl, Helena Zingle, who was raised by Comanches and doesn't speak a word of English. Now think about that. She doesn't want to be rescued. To her, the Comanches were family. The movie raises a question few people ask. What happens when you take a child out of the only world she knows and call it salvation? Reconstruction-era Texas shows up here as it really was, violent, divided, and full of people trying to impose their own rules in a land where the law barely existed. Reconstruction, which was supposed to reorganize the South after the war, was basically a joke in Texas. Militias did whatever they wanted. Former Confederates were still in charge, and entire communities lived isolated with no news at all from the rest of the country. It's not just a road movie. It's a portrait of a country that won a war and had no idea what to do with the victory. Movie 19, Hell or High Water, 2016. Rating, 9. In 2016, Hollywood did something rare. It made a movie about Texas that Texas itself would actually recognize. Two brothers decide to rob branches of the same bank that's about to take their family farm. The irony is so cruel it feels made up. But anyone who lived through the 2008 crisis knows it isn't. On the other side, Jeff Bridges plays a Texas Ranger close to retirement who chases the two of them, knowing deep down that they're right. That inner conflict is what separates this movie from any ordinary thriller. Taylor Sheridan wrote the screenplay, the same guy behind Yellowstone and Sicario. The guy understands something most screenwriters seem to have forgotten. The Western was never really about cowboys and shootouts. It was about ordinary people trapped by forces bigger than themselves. Here, that force isn't a rival gang. It's the financial system. The empty little towns of West Texas tell the story on their own, without needing dialogue. It was nominated for the Oscar for Best Picture. It lost, but anyone who watched it knows it shouldn't have. Movie 20, The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, 2007. Rating, 9. By 1882, Jesse James wasn't just an outlaw anymore. He was a living legend, and he knew it. The problem with becoming a legend is that everyone wants a piece of you. Some want to shake your hand. Others want to put you in a coffin. Robert Ford wanted both. He was 20 years old, had idolized Jesse since he was a kid, and ended up shooting his own idol in the back inside Jesse's living room. What nobody tells you is what came after. Ford spent the next few years traveling around the country, acting out the assassination on theater stages, night after night, reenacting the moment that destroyed his life. Audiences paid for tickets just to boo him. They called him a coward in every town. He died at 30, shot in a bar in Colorado, and almost nobody cared. Brad Pitt captures that final day's Jesse, suspicious of everyone, testing his partner's loyalty with cruel little mind games. Casey Affleck delivers a Robert Ford who makes you feel sorry for him and angry at him at the same time. The movie is slow on purpose. It wants you to feel the weight of time passing, the same way Ford felt every day after that shot. The 20 movies on this list ask those questions in different ways, in different eras, for different audiences. And the real history, the Wyatt Earps, Doc Holliday's, Butch Cassidy's who actually existed, is even more complex than the best movies have managed to capture. That's the reason for this channel.